Spotlight is proudly sponsored by HEC Media, St. Louis's home for arts, education, and culture.
His dedication to his craft makes him stand out.
My prayer is that people would choose to love people that look different than them.
Can one thing I do make a difference? Yes, yes, yes.
Today on Spotlight, honoring Earth Day, how the zoo is looking at nature-based solutions to help fight climate change. Plus, new exhibits at the Sheldon Art Gallery, like this series of drawings that took the artist 3 years to create. They also feature painter Wallace Herndon Smith, a man whose life is the subject of a documentary. But first, two pastors team up and write a book that encourages unity to promote healing. It's Sunday and you're watching the multiple Emmy Award-winning Spotlight.
The early 2020s have been a challenging time for the whole world. Wildfires, war, and of course, the Corona-19 outbreak and pandemic. And showing up through all of this in the United States, the ever-present subject of race and race relations has managed to grab the attention of America's citizens and dominate headlines and conversations. However, many people from all sides and angles of the race issue have been newly inspired to try to find a way to bring a very divided nation closer together in order to address one of the country's oldest woes. Two friends from two different racial backgrounds in two different parts of the U.S. were going along in their chosen careers as Christian pastors. John Siebling in the Memphis area and Wayne Francis in the New York City area. They continue to head up their branches of their intentionally racially diverse congregations at the Life Church. They wanted to add to the national racial dialogue from the perspective that they knew best. And they've done that in their new book, God and Race, a guide for moving beyond black fists and white knuckles. They've teamed up to write about race relations from their Christian viewpoint with concrete, road-tested examples of how their churches have methodically gone about fostering a racially mixed environment where churches historically have been some of the most racially divided spaces in the land. They also hope that everyone can take points from their book to practice a more racially mixed and harmonious lifestyle, whether it's in a house of worship, at the workplace, or just out and about in everyday life.
There's a beautiful thing that I think that a person that doesn't have faith at all can look at this book as a resource and see, because here's the deal. What makes pastors interesting is that we lead people totally voluntarily. This is not a corporation figuring out how to do some diversity training that you have to go through to be an employee. We're leaders that are creating a culture that people either have to buy into or resist. So I think that alone brings a different level of authority into a space that, regardless of what you believe about God, you have to say, man, I respect people that are trying to inspire volunteers that congregate. Then there's not a lot of places in culture anymore that gather people weekly on their own terms, their own willingness to come and do that. So I feel like we've created a resource that models relationship. And regardless of where you land spiritually, we're showing you how to do it in a very, very practical way, day to day, week in, week out. And I think that's what makes this a lasting resource for us.
My prayer is that people would choose to love people that look different than them, to respect people that look different than them. I feel like there's so much negativity and division and hate in the world. I mean, if we could just spread a little bit of love and get people to have a little bit of compassion for someone that's different than them, gosh, and that's what I would hope. And that, that has, less to do with what religion you're a part of and more to do with your human heart and your own heart toward people. I think Wayne and I feel like our number one strategy is to model for people what a black-white friendship can look like, that we can have honest, good discussion that is civil. And even if we may not agree on certain things, we can still keep our hearts open to each other and love each other. So friendship, I think that's my number one piece of advice.
To find out their 4 practical steps to have healing conversations, watch the full interview at hecmedia.org.
HEC Media. Recognized. Celebrated. honored time and again for excellence in the industry. HEC Media has been bringing home the hardware for over a decade. Arts and education to author talks, magazine shows and documentaries, individual craft achievements to overall excellence. Find all of the award-winning content at hecmedia.org.
Framing our future is this plan where zoos, including the St. Louis Zoo, have come together to really look at how we can create the future we want. So by 2030, if we can look for nature-based solutions, we can minimize climate change and global warming. Climate change is one of those big challenges that we face all around the globe today. But if we think about some of those other challenges and how they interact, we can think about climate change, the loss of biodiversity, which means the loss of species, as well as emerging infectious diseases. All three of these challenges we face today work together and interconnect and need to be looked at together as we look for solutions to each of these three challenges. So nature-based solutions are really thinking about what nature does for us every day. And we take nature for granted, right? And what is happening with the plants and the forest and the oceans and the world untouched by humans is they're providing services to us every day. Trees and rainforests are the lungs of the planet. They're sequestering carbon dioxide, they're producing oxygen. The pollinators, the burrowing animals, the ecosystem engineers we call them, where they're moving nutrients around. Every day, that's the kind of services that nature is providing for us. Unfortunately, in recent time, because of the growing human footprint, these ecosystem services that nature has provided us are slowing down. Here at the St. Louis Zoo, we have a number of projects that are not just trying to find the challenges and ask the questions of what's happening, but really the solutions. And one great example is a program we've been involved in for 6 or 7 years now in Brazil, in the Amazon rainforest. And so this program is looking at zoonotic diseases, are those pathogens that are shared between human and non-human animals. SARS-CoV-2 is one example. And what we're finding is an intact forest that not only is acting as the lungs of our planet, sequestering CO2, but they're actually protecting humans from some of these zoonotic viruses. So monkeys and other non-human primates that may live in that forest act as sink for these viruses, so they don't go to the villages, they don't go to the humans. So not only are they helping mitigate climate change, they're actually preventing and protecting us from emerging infectious diseases. We're always asking each other, do I make a difference? Can one thing I do make a difference? And I would say yes, yes, yes. Many of us have yards or balconies or places where we could plant things that bring pollinators in. We can have lawns that aren't treated with a lot of pesticides or products. We can really have our homes, our backyards, our neighborhoods that are nature friendly, bringing the birds and the bees and things in. And it's not just good for nature itself, it's also good for our family health.
In honor of Easter, handcrafted stained glass, later on Spotlight.
We are at the Sheldon Art Galleries and we're showing several new exhibits. This spring we're exhibiting many different styles and mediums throughout the galleries, ranging from photography, realism, watercolors, and very large-scale sculptures. So there's something for everybody to see. The first artist I'd like to mention in our exhibits is Jason Ackman from Central Illinois. He does large-scale sculptures that focuses on tension and balance, and he uses reclaimed lumber throughout most of his work. The tension in Jason's work is heightened through the low ceilings that we have in the gallery, so you become overwhelmed by the work. The next exhibit is Mel Watkins. She's from Carbondale, Illinois, and she lives near the Shawnee National Park. Her work is a series of drawings that took her 3 years to do, and it's the death of a tree. So you see the cycle from spring, summer, fall, into winter of this tree dying. This is the first time she's exhibited it, and it's the first time she's seen it fully in the space. And we were very happy to have it here. Jerry Monteith is in the space next to Mel Watkins, and they're actually a married couple, and he's influenced by their environment as well, near Shawnee National Park. And Jerry uses a lot of natural materials in his sculptures, but what we have featured is the small fishing lure style sculptures. He calls them attractors, and they're little creatures that he's made out of the same technique of fishing lures, but they're all man-made materials. Everything's been recycled. Jamie Crayer is exhibiting with us a series of photographs that she has taken during the pandemic with her iPhone. The artist encourages visitors to pick up the photographs. They're a very small scale, kind of a large deck of cards, and this is a way for Jamie to make the work interactive and to become an everyday object rather than something that's precious. We're also exhibiting Sheldon Helfman's series of watercolors. They're very large scale, and 6 of them have been done over this past year, and they're hyper realistic. He focuses on urban settings and will not eliminate anything out of the photographs. So you have cracks in buildings and debris, and everything is highlighted. And with his use of complex lighting, they're beautiful and they glow from the paper. In our AT&T Youth and Emerging Artists Gallery, we have SIU Edwardsville BFA students exhibiting with us. We have 6 students that their work ranges from printmaking, ceramics, and watercolors. SIU Edwardsville has a very strong art department where the faculty really encourage their students to finish their work to where it's ready to be presented. In the Bellwether Gallery, we have an exhibit of Wallace Herndon Smith traveling through Europe. The exhibit features photographs that Wally took from 1950s through the 60s. He was an avid photographer, and he worked directly from the photographs to create paintings. So we have oils and watercolors that range from the 50s, 60s mostly. So we have one back here that's still rather sketchy, that was never quite completed, and a series of photographs there next to it. Wally's work ranges from watercolors to oils, but he really shows his skills in his watercolors. They're very beautiful and they have a looseness, but still catching the light and realism within the building structures. And he learned this skill through Washington University. He enrolled in the architecture department and was there for 2 years, designed a few buildings, but eventually decided to pursue painting, encouraged by his wife, Kelsey. We're really excited to be showing Wallace Herndon Smith's work and all the other artists that are featured this spring. So please come down and check out the exhibits. They're up through May 7th, and you can find more information on our website at www.thesheldon.org.
Artist Wallace Herndon Smith was born into an affluent St. Louis family in 1901. He studied theater and architecture. It was through architecture that he discovered his love of painting.
Watercolors occupy an interesting place in his body of work, I think. In terms of painting, watercolor was the first activity that he really undertook because he started out studying to be an architect, and watercolor is used many times by people studying architecture and by architects for enhancing and filling in detail of architectural drawings. A lot of times architectural drawings will be rendered in pen or pencil or some sort of graphic medium, and then the watercolor washes will give an atmosphere and give a stronger sense of space so that you can imagine the architectural form through the watercolor. So this is the direction that he came to watercolor. And I know that he started out as a watercolor painter, and very early in the 1930s won a prize for his watercolors. And so I think that was a signal to him that he was moving in the right direction. So watercolor, I think, again, occupies an important place in his career, although I think that he's become better known for his oils. Smith was coming at an interesting time in the development of American art, a peculiarly American art. He was coming of age as a painter in that transition point between regionalism, this style that emphasizes realism, and the transition to abstract art, which of course made New York the center of the art world starting in the 1940s and beyond. And Smith was a sort of bridge, time-wise, chronologically, between those two movements in American art. He was extremely well-versed in theory. He knew more about modern art than probably any of his contemporaries. He went to Paris, he went to museums, he did his research. But very interestingly, he was just not one to change or to follow a trend or a fashion. He stayed committed to his ideals and to the project of rendering form solidly on the canvas and unifying it and making it a delightful composition to behold. He was really, really interested in modernist artists, particularly French modernist artists. He loved Matisse. As much as he was interested in some of the French modernist painters, he never went as far as they did in terms of experimentation with color and with the loosening up of form. It may be one of the reasons why Wally Smith is not better known. He never became interested in radical abstract experimentation. So he was slightly out of fashion at the time in American art, which is not to say that he was not a great artist. I think in many ways, his dedication to his craft makes him stand out among any of the realist painters of the 20th century in the United States. I have never seen a body of work that represented such steadfast commitment to the kinds of artistic ideals that he was interested in. If history is going to go back and sort of right a wrong, I think it's going to go back and notice that through all of the other fashions that came and went in the 20th century in the history of American painting, Smith never strayed from his course, and he just remained a very, very, very solid, very, very passionate painter. And I have to imagine that history is going to eventually give him his due.
Wallace passed away in 1990 at his home in Ladue, Missouri. Visit hecmedia.org to watch the full documentary and learn how Wallace knew Jimmy Stewart and Jackson Pollock.
First person, real world, expert driven. That's the focus of the videos, lesson plans, and activity ideas you'll find at our educational website, educate.today.
They may look like your standard run-of-the-mill muffins.
I skipped breakfast for this, so I'm very excited.
But this Butterfly House team hopes those muffins will help transform the way you think about food.
It is a recipe that you could find on the internet or from a family recipe book for apple cinnamon muffins.
Nothing revolutionary there, but wait for it.
Then just added about 2 tablespoons of this Mighty Cricket Clean Protein Powder.
If you didn't catch it, he just said
This Mighty Cricket Clean Protein Powder.
cricket powder.
My grandma never baked crickets in her muffins.
Mine either, but these muffins have ground up roasted crickets in them.
For science.
So good. I taste cinnamon. I taste apples.
Yeah.
I don't taste any crickets.
Before you question their taste buds and maybe their sanity, adding that cricket powder actually made these muffins healthier.
I would say there's health and environmental benefits. So good for us, better for the planet.
Crickets are rich in nutrients, especially protein, but also iron, calcium, and omega-3s. And it takes a lot less resources to raise crickets given their small size. For example, a pound of crickets requires 1,800 times less water than a pound of beef. And they emit 100 times fewer carbon greenhouse gases.
These are actual whole roasted crickets.
Yes, Full-size crickets sautéed in butter is the team's second, more adventurous course.
Would you all like one of these?
Absolutely.
There you go.
Thank you.
Yeah. Lobster of the land.
Really good.
Oh.
Yeah, that's pretty much what escargot is.
Oh yeah, it's almost all
you
butter.
dip the snails in butter. It's delicious.
Exactly.
Sarah Schlafly has come a long way in entomophagy, the word used for eating insects.
So when I started the company, I did not want to eat a bug at all. I was pretty terrified of it.
So how did she go from that to starting Mighty Cricket, the business that makes the ground-up cricket powder you saw earlier in this story?
One of the biggest motivators for me was finding a clean protein source that was good for you, good for the planet, but one that could be highly economical. So a protein source that was accessible to people of low income. And grass-fed beef, free-range chicken is never going to get there because it's so resource intensive. And when I learned about insects as a protein source and how efficient they are at converting raw materials into a solid, complete protein, I realized that if I can just scale the industry and get Americans to adopt this as a food source, then we can drive down the cost of that, and all of a sudden in 20 or 30 years, we will have access to a clean protein source that we don't have today.
About 2 billion people around the world already eat bugs, and Sarah thinks grinding up crickets into an unrecognizable powder will help Americans join that number.
The ground powdered cricket was my gateway bug. Now I eat whole roasted grasshoppers without any problem. I eat bee larvae. I eat all sorts of things that I never would have dreamed of eating 5 years ago.
As it turns out, most of us have been unknowingly eating bugs for all of our lives. Here's just one example. Take a standard chocolate bar. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration allows for everyone to have about 30 pieces of insects.
We're not talking about like whole cricket legs or things like that. We're talking about little fragments of exoskeleton that have already been broken up. We're talking about little, microgram pieces that you would never know are there. And it's not going to harm you even if you do eat these because they're totally edible.
Bugs play such a vital role in our food system, pollinating flowers and tilling soil, that it's impossible to get all of them off our harvested food.
Pretty much every food source that we consume does have some insect contact before it makes it to our plate.
Figs are pollinated by tiny fig wasps.
Only true pollinator of the fig fruit.
Wow.
So, can you guess what I'm going to say?
There are wasps in there?
There are almost surely some measure of
All
wasps
right.
in anything you get
dig
made
in.
of fig.
Even the coffee beans used to make your cup of joe require pollination, which means
Coffee beans are allowed to have up to 10% or more by count insect parts.
90% coffee, 10% fly.
most Americans couldn't imagine life without our pollinated foods. But does that mean they'll eventually make the move to buying packaged edible bugs?
I think it's almost inevitable, to be honest. That's my prediction. Because if you look in the past, check out things like sushi, people eating raw fish. I can remember a time when that was very trendy, kind of outside. Well, you can't walk down the street in St. Louis or anywhere without running into a new sushi restaurant now. Back in colonial times, lobster was seen as a disgusting food that you would not eat unless you had no other choice. In fact, it was seen as borderline inhumane to serve it to prisoners. This bug that was trawled out of the ocean, because it is a bug. It's a crustacean, not an insect, but it's a bug.
Okay, so if the super ingredient in these muffins is the lobster of the land.
They're very good. I would never know. There's a cricket in here.
Might as well go all in for my tasting experience.
Bite the whole thing.
Hang on.
Bite the whole thing. Yeah, like a sushi roll.
It's good.
While some, like photographer Pete Foggy, might not be as easily convinced as me,
You want to try some, Pete?
No thanks.
this team hopes many will at least learn about the importance of bugs in our food supply. And maybe that will help spur the cultural shift for these gourmet grubs.
They're not too gross, they're not fear factor kind of food, they're dinner. I think you're definitely going to see these things kind of become more and more popular.
This story is brought to you in partnership with STL Made.
Beauty itself is a language. It's just the hue of a stained glass window, the light that it casts on a space. What we do is entirely unique in art in that we use transmitted light. There's something about that you can't really get in any other art form. My name is Aaron Fry. I am the president of Emil Fry & Associates, Incorporated. I am the 5th generation of the studio. It was founded by my great-great-grandfather and handed down for 5 successive generations now. I live on the property in the house that my great-grandfather built. Not only do I have a touchstone with the work that he does, I literally sleep in the same room that he used to sleep. My father likes to say that we are a 15th century trade. Very little in our craft has actually changed over the last 150, 200 years. The handiwork, craftsmanship, you can't do that by machine. When we design, we don't design on a computer. Everything is hand-drawn. If you remove the hand from that process, you're, in a sense, removing the soul from that process. I was the glass cutter here for 6 or 7 years. And when I'm doing that, it's home. For me, it was the color of the collection and being able to be that first step in forming a stained glass window. I can't tell you how many times I've been in to do an install and you put one window in, looks pretty nice. You put 2 more in, it's starting to look great. The impact of stained glass upon that space transforms it. St. Louis is really lucky. They had a crowd of talented architects. Those architects designed some incredibly beautiful buildings. These are churches that St. Louisans don't recognize how lucky we are to have them. Back in the day, when churches were being built at a breakneck speed, art was a communal possession. You see a church like St. Francis de Sales built largely off the donations of immigrants. This is really impressive. These were not the wealthy barons of St. Louis. They contributed that largely because they weren't able to afford artwork or beauty in their own home, but as a community, they were able to have something entirely glorious. We were really lucky that we ended up in St. Louis in that first generation. St. Louis offers something that very few other cities do. There's a history here. Not only do we have old buildings, they're beautiful old buildings. We are proud St. Louisans, and it's just a great city to live.
Visit thestl.com for more stories like this one. Next week, the St. Louis Literary Awards, celebrating writers. Plus, how cats are genetically similar to humans. Thanks for watching Spotlight. Join us next Sunday at 9:30 a.m. on KPLR 11.